So good to talk to you. So good to engage with all of you. We are now, well, it's not over yet, but I'm trying, as I told you, to do 5 for 5 this week. That is the goal, to go live 5 times, 5 days in a row, Monday through Friday. Today is Tuesday. We are now 2 for 5. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it real. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. All are welcome. The way we do things here is I give my opening remarks, and after I give my opening remarks, from there, I answer your super chat questions for the remainder of the show. But before we do that, we do the roll call. So there are 3 parts to the program. For those who may not be familiar, opening remarks, roll call, super chats. That's how it works. Boom, boom, boom. So folks, before I get started with my opening remarks, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I welcome all of you, fans, haters, and lurkers, right? I welcome all of you to enjoy an afternoon of unnamed diet beverage and great comments. Welcome, city builders. That's Alex. That's how I should do it. Welcome, city builders. I mean, should I do it that way? Should it be like that? I'm just kidding. But listen, folks, we're having a great time here. So much that we can talk about. So much to engage with. Greetings from the wild forest near Cambridge, United Kingdom. The wild forest, says the person who calls themselves Bigfoot. Well, there you go. There you go. There you go. The Sasquatch is in the wild forest near Cambridge, UK, and he has sent me my first super chat. But who says the Sasquatch has to be male, right? Why do we assume that? We always assume Bigfoot is a man. It's he, right? But who says, right? I'm laughing, of course. Laughing, of course, right? Now, is that going to get me demonetized, right? I mean, if I'm on here talking about Bigfoot, are they going to say that I'm spreading conspiracy theories or rumors or something? Is that what's going to happen? They're going to demonetize me for talking about Bigfoot. Just to be clear, no one here believes in Bigfoot. It is a running joke. We are not adherents of the Sasquatch here on this channel. We may make jokes about Bigfoot, but we do not believe in I'm just kidding. All right, folks, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, post this video wherever videos are posted, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, ProWiki, Bunker Chan. There you go. There you go, folks. Did you just assume my gender? Just kidding. Oh, well, thank you, Bigfoot. Thank you, Bigfoot. I respect you, Bigfoot. I respect you. But there you go. Anyway, folks. So, a couple lives ago, I mentioned Paul Revere and the Raiders. Do people remember this? I mentioned an obscure rock and roll band from the 1960s called Paul Revere and the Raiders. They were notorious for wearing tri-cornered hats, dressing like figures from the American Revolution. They had 3 hit songs, Kicks, Just Like Me, and Cherokee Nation. And the real talent behind the group was not the drummer, who happened to be named Paul Revere, from which they got their name. The real talent behind the group was a guy named Mark Lindsay, who had quite a big career. Paul Revere and the Raiders, a British invasion 1960s rock and roll band. So I mentioned Paul Revere and the Raiders, and now I cannot stop thinking about Paul Revere and the Raiders. Their songs are going through my head. I've been watching their YouTube videos. I even remember back during the early years of Barack Obama, there was a YouTube channel I used to watch years ago as a college student. There was a YouTube channel I used to watch called Red State Update. And when the Tea Party got started and the Republicans were all wearing tri-cornered hats and BBC, it's report false. Republicans were all dressing up as the Tea Party. They had this character who was pretending to be a Republican, and I remember on Red State Update, he was saying, "Oh, wow, why are the Republicans turned into a bunch of tree-hugging hippies, a bunch of hippies, they're protesting, dressing up like the Founding Fathers, oh, I can't believe it." Another guy says to him, he says, "I don't think the hippies dressed up like Founding Fathers. They did a lot of protesting. I don't think they dressed up like the Founding Fathers." To which his retort was, "Oh yeah, what about old Paul Revere and the Raiders?" Yeah, so there you go. I will never forget that. Now I cannot stop thinking about Paul Revere and the Raiders. Paul Revere and the Raiders, right? It's one of those obscure, so you think about 60s rock and roll. You've got the Beatles. Everyone knows the Beatles, right? You've got earlier rock and roll. Elvis is the late 50s, etc. But British invasion, 1960s, you think about the Beatles, you think about the Rolling Stones. But then there's a number of these obscure groups that had like one hit song. Jackson Hinkle Arrest. We talked about that yesterday, but I'm writing it down. They had like one hit song. Herman's Hermits, and Jack and the Seven Jills, oh my goodness, there were so many of these little tiny bands that were like, they were popular for like 2 seconds during the 1960s. And I think most of them are probably still around. There's like one living member of the band, and they tour, and play at like little tiny bars around the country or something. I bet you could probably go see Paul Revere and the Raiders now. If it weren't for the pandemic, I bet they're still touring or something like that, right? I'm trying to remember, there were a bunch of these little tiny rock and roll bands that had like one hit song. I can't even remember, right? But there you go. And why do I know that? I mean, I was born in the late 1980s, so why in the world do I know about obscure rock and roll bands like Paul Revere and the Raiders and Jack and the Seven Jills and Herman's Hermits? Why do I know this? I shouldn't know this, right? There are some things that someone my age should not know, right? It's good to know all about Marxist history, Singapore thoughts. It's good to know about Marxist history, very good to know about Marxist history, but knowing about obscure rock and roll bands from this era, maybe not the best use of my time, right? Now, Paul Revere and the Raiders, their nickname comes from the hero of the American Revolution, Paul Revere, right? When I was a kid in elementary school, right? They don't do this in New York City elementary schools. They don't do this in like suburban elementary schools. I swear, my elementary school that I went to in Ohio had not updated their curriculum since the 1950s. We did a play about Thanksgiving and the Native Americans and the white people, having a great Thanksgiving dinner together. We took the globe of the school and we covered it in brown construction paper and we called it Plymouth Rock. I remember holding up the globe covered in construction paper and saying, "This is Plymouth Rock." That was my line in the Thanksgiving play. And I do remember that when we were being taught, Bolsonaro fears a coup, writing it down. When we were being taught about American history, we were read an epic poem. "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." There you go. I don't remember the rest of it. I just remember the first line, the first couplet, the first opening bit of this famous work of American poetry. "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." This is apparently a big part of American patriotic mythology, is that there was this man by the name of Paul Revere who alerted the residents of Boston that the British military was on its way to attack Boston. And in all the cartoons that we watched, and in all of the various, on all the various, children's books that we were told about Paul Revere. Paul Revere, apparently, he looked at a church, and they were going to light one candle if the British were coming by land, and two candles if they were coming by sea. And he saw, I don't even remember if they were coming by land or coming by sea. I don't even remember, but he saw however many candles they lit, either one or two. And then he got upon his horse and started riding late into the night, shouting loudly at the top of his lungs, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" and alerting everyone in the town and awakening them to the fact that the British were indeed coming. And it's funny, great minds think alike, and Kinky in the chat is already thinking exactly what I'm thinking, which is I remember that Paul Revere was once again in the center of the news when Sarah Palin gave an interview at Paul Revere's home and epically got the story wrong. Paul Revere was alerting everyone that the British army was coming, and shouting the British are coming. And Sarah Palin, gave an interview at the site of the Paul Revere house or the site of something, and she said, Paul Revere told everyone that the British were going to take their guns away. And that was very embarrassing because, that was not what he was alerting people to. He was alerting people that the British military was coming to, take control of Boston, but they were going to come and take everyone's guns away. It was kind of her NRA moment. But then, right, this is the weirdness of the world politics, right? I mean, it was basically she had Barack Obama and the British Army confused, right? She thought that the British Army was and take everyone's Second Amendment rights away or something. But then, after she said the British Army was going to come and take everyone's guns away, there were a number of conservatives who stepped up and said, well, technically, that was a thing the British Army did, and maybe they weren't going to do that when they got to Boston, but technically, the right to bear arms, if you want to get all technical, that way, and they defended her on that point, and it's like, really? Okay, well, there you go. That's why I'm thinking about Paul Revere. Paul Revere. So listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere and of the 1960s rock and roll band known as Paul Revere and the Raiders. And you shall hear of Sarah Palin and her epic gaffe in which she got the British Army confused with Barack Obama, who's going to take everyone's guns away. These are epic moments. These are epic moments that we all must discuss as great experts on American history. You have to wonder about things like that. Did Paul Revere ever exist? Is he a fictional character made up, perhaps? When I was in school, we even learned the epic story of George Washington and how he could not tell a lie. He did indeed cut down his father's cherry tree, his father's favorite cherry tree. He could not tell a lie. And then I learned when I got to 5th grade, my teacher told us that actually that story that you were told in 2nd grade about George Washington cutting down the cherry tree didn't actually happen. So it was weird. I guess I got both sides of it. Now they don't even bother to tell the kids that George Washington famously didn't cut down famously told his father, "I cannot tell a lie. I did cut down your cherry tree." And nowadays they don't tell kids that at all, but I got half. I got half of it. First I was told that George Washington could not tell a lie, and he did indeed cut down his father's cherry tree, and then I was told that the whole story was completely made up. So there you go. That is how great it was. But nowadays I don't think they teach kids this stuff anymore. I think our curriculum in school is much more woke, so to speak. I think they are a little more honest about U.S. history, but maybe they're not. I don't even know. I really don't even know. I don't know. But anyway, there we go. That was our little bit there when we talked about Paul Revere and Sarah Palin and George Washington's cherry tree and all of that. So there you go. There you go, folks. I am happy to give you all some opening remarks. We are coming up on the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. 20 years it will have been since the September 11th attacks. That will be this Saturday. Furthermore, on September 17th, the following Friday, that will be the 10-year anniversary of the Occupy Wall Street protests. So some pretty big anniversaries coming up. And it's interesting to think about all of these things happening in September, right? September is one of those months that, it's summer's over technically, but it's not, it's not full-on fall yet. It's not October and November, and it's this kind of like happy medium, right? And it's weird because there's a song, again, now we're back to rock and roll music. There's a song by Green Day, the rock and roll band Green Day. They had a song, I believe it came out when I was in high school, Wake Me Up When September Ends. It was one of those emo, depressive songs. Wake me up when September ends, right? It was one of those, and it refers to the fact that some people get down in the dumps in September. The light of the summer is gone, the weather changes, and it's suddenly cooler, and some people's mood, goes south, right? And, it's important, right? Your body and your mind are definitely connected. I mean, one thing that I've been struggling to do is I've learned to do the opposite, right? So as it is now September, I'm trying to be more active, right? Because my body all of a sudden wants to slow down. It's like, oh, it's cooler now, you don't have as much heat. My body just wants to slow down. And so I'm in order to not fall into that rut, in order to not become inactive, I'm doing the opposite. We're doing 5 for 5 this week, 5 streams in 5 days. Going to the gym, exercising, right? You got to push back. You got to fight back against these things, right? Don't fall into the rut. You are in charge. You are in charge. Your mind is in charge, not your body. And this is the challenge of our times. But the fact that the 20-year anniversary of 9/11 is approaching means that 20 years of the war on terror have taken place. 20 years, the U.S. government has been waging a war on terror. And I cannot think of a greater farce than the war on terror. It is one of the greatest deceptions that I have ever seen in my life. The war on terror is a great example, of a deception. All right, red, brown. A war on terror. Outline, political, histories, textbook. The war on terror. The idea of the war on terror was this. For those of you who may not have been born at the time, for those of you who may not have been politically conscious at the time, I was an 8th grader when the war on terror began. And this is the logic that we were given for the war on terror. The idea was this. We have been brutally attacked by terrorists on 9/11. These terrorists, followers of Osama bin Laden, fanatical Wahhabis, Islamic terrorists, we are told, religious fanatics led by Osama bin Laden have attacked us ruthlessly, taken the lives of Americans. And so, as a result of that, the USA must now engage in a war on terror to make sure that such horrendous events do not continue to occur. That's the idea, right? That the USA should wage a war against the terrorists, against Al-Qaeda and the terrorist networks that perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, in order to make sure that such events do not happen. A couple of years later, I think it was 7 or 8 years after 9/11, they started saying, they had this thing, they said, we fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. That was the logic of the war on terror. And here's the problem with that. You ready? The war on terror involved the United States fighting everyone except the terrorists. I'm deadly serious. The USA, while it was waging a war on terror, while it was supposed to be fighting against the people who attacked on 9/11, who we are told were al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, the United States proceeded to wage a war against everyone else. After 9/11, the government of Libya, led by Muammar Gaddafi, said, wow, we've been fighting these people for years. We've been fighting Wahhabi terrorists tied in with Saudi Arabia and Osama bin Laden. We've been fighting them for years. You want to help? You want to help the United States in the war on terror? We will help you, said Gaddafi. We will help you, and in fact, we'll torture people for you. We will set up a program. You don't believe in torture, United States? If you want to fly people to Libya, we are so happy. USA, you've been fighting us and trying and bombing us, but now you've been attacked by al-Qaeda, and we are constantly being attacked by al-Qaeda, so let's team up. And you know who else said to the United States roughly the same thing? The Syrian government. The Syrian government, after 9/11, they said, wow, we've been fighting these people for years. The Muslim Brotherhood, al-Qaeda, we've been fighting them for years. Wow. USA, you need help fighting al-Qaeda? We're on your side. We've been fighting these people for a long time. They're awful. Let's team up. And in fact, the Syrian government, I believe, even offered to torture people for the United States. You know who else, after 9/11, stepped up and said, we will work with you? Iraq. Iraq. Why? Because Saddam Hussein was a secular leader from the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party. And he stepped up and he said, wow, we've been fighting these people for years. Osama bin Laden, Muslim Brotherhood, hey, sign us up. We'll help you fight the war on terror. You know who else stepped up and said they would help out the United States in its fight against terrorism? The Islamic Republic of Iran. The Iranians stepped up and they said, wow, we've been fighting against these people for years. They call us Shia apostates. They think that our religion, our interpretation of Islam is an apostasy, and they kill people. And Osama bin Laden is from Saudi Arabia, and in the schools in Saudi Arabia, they teach people that our religion, Shia Islam, is a secret Jewish conspiracy against the Saudi king. So hey, we're with you. You want to fight against al-Qaeda? We'll help you out. So you'd think that would be a great moment for the United States, because for the first time, it seems like all the governments in that region that the United States has had trouble with and fought with for years, like the government of Iraq, like the government of Libya, like the government of Iran, like the government of Syria, you would think the United States would have said, wow, okay, since we're going to team up against al-Qaeda, since we're going to team up against these terrorists, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Iran, we're going to team up and we're going to not what happened. That is not what happened. Instead of fighting against the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11, instead of fighting al-Qaeda, following 9/11, the United States proceeded to fight against first the government of Afghanistan, then the government of Iraq, then the government of Libya, and then the government of Syria. Meanwhile, the United States bombed Somalia, and now there's a proxy war going on in Yemen and a proxy war going on in Bahrain. The United States, throughout the 20 years of its war on terror, has been fighting all the enemies of al-Qaeda. Instead of fighting al-Qaeda, the United States has been fighting al-Qaeda's enemies. In the so-called war on terror, the United States has been functioning as al-Qaeda's air force. One of al-Qaeda's biggest enemies was the government of Libya, led by Muammar Gaddafi. The United States successfully overthrew the government of Libya led by Al-Qaeda, or led by Gaddafi, and now Al-Qaeda and other similar groups have set up shop in Libya. One of the biggest enemies of Al-Qaeda was Saddam Hussein. And so, the United States overthrew the government of Iraq, and the result has been refugees and chaos and misery, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS set up shop in Iraq. One of the biggest enemies of Al-Qaeda was the Syrian Arab Republic, and the United States has unleashed over a decade of civil war against the Syrian government. And in the chaos and instability, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Wahhabi groups have set up shop. The war on terror the United States has been waging has been a war on everyone but the terrorists. It has been a war against secular governments. It has been a war against socialist governments. It has been a war against anti-imperialists, and the main beneficiaries of the war on terror have been the terrorists. No one has gained more from the war on terror than the terrorists themselves. Al-Qaeda, the Wahhabi networks, ISIS, ISIS-K, the Muslim Brotherhood, these groups have all benefited very significantly from the war on terror, because the United States has gone in and cleared out all of their enemies. The United States has not been fighting a war on terror. It has been fighting a war against the enemies of terror. Thank you for the super chat, much appreciated. That is what the United States has been doing for the past 20 years. And it requires not that much information on Middle Eastern history to recognize that. You really don't need a degree in the history of the Middle East. You don't need to be an Arabic translator to comprehend this. It's pretty basic. Folks, Osama bin Laden is not an Iraqi, not an Iranian, not a Syrian, not a Libyan. Osama bin Laden was Saudi. He was from Saudi Arabia. And he wasn't just any Saudi. The bin Laden family are one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia. They have a state monopoly on construction. Basically, if there's a construction project going on in Saudi Arabia, the bin Laden family, their business gets to run it. The bin Laden family are one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia. And we now have the 28 pages that were classified from the 9/11 Commission and their investigations. They're now public. The 28 pages were made public back in 2016, and the 28 pages which were classified about Saudi Arabia informed us of a number of things. For example, there was a dry run of 9/11. Did you know that? Apparently, there was a flight going to Saudi Arabia, and a couple guys seized the cockpit of the flight with box cutters. And then when they got to Saudi Arabia, they were handed over to Saudi authorities, and nobody really knows what happened to them. There was a dry run of 9/11. That is in the 28 pages. I did not make that up. This is not something I read on a conspiracy website. This is something that is in the 9/11 Commission report. Another thing that is in the 9/11 28 pages that are redacted, that were made public in 2016, was that a number of individuals who worked at Saudi consulates were in communication with the hijackers. They were individuals who worked at Saudi government consulates throughout the United States who were talking to the hijackers. Furthermore, the Saudi government officials were very, very, very uncooperative when they were interviewed by the FBI and CIA. And let me remind you, after 9/11, they grounded all the planes in the United States. All the flights were canceled. There was only one plane that was allowed to fly after 9/11. One plane was allowed into the air. And what was that one plane doing that one plane, the only plane they allowed in the air after the 9/11 attacks. And that was a plane, a private jet, that flew around the United States, picking up members of the Saudi royal family and the bin Laden family, and flying them back to Saudi Arabia, just to make sure that after 9/11, no one, gave them some trouble. Now, if you want to talk about a farce, an absolute farce, that is the war on terror. We've been fighting everyone except the terrorists. We've been fighting everyone except for the government in which the terrorists were heavily embedded. In fact, we've been going around and fighting the enemies of Saudi Arabia and fighting the enemies of Al-Qaeda. That has been the war on terror. If you want to talk about an utter, complete farce, I can think of no greater example. They told us that Saddam Hussein had connections to 9/11. Well, those claims were largely debunked. The claim, the proof that Saddam Hussein was somehow connected to 9/11 was that one of the hijackers once went to the hospital in Iraq. Well, people from many different countries go to the hospital in many different countries. Thank you, Darius, for the super chat. People in many different countries go to the hospital in many different countries. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia, there was a lot more than somebody going to the hospital. There was a dry run. There were people working in consulates. There was one of the wealthiest families in the country, being the family of the guy we were told was the mastermind behind the attack. There was a lot more connections to the Saudi government. But the United States didn't fight the Saudi government. The United States fought everyone who is an enemy of the Saudi government. It went around fighting the enemies of the government that was most connected to 9/11, and based all of this on spurious logic. I was not the most well-educated person. I was not as familiar with the world as I am now when I was in 8th grade and 9th grade after 9/11. But even I knew that Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein were not allies. At my young age, I was pretty well aware that Ba'athist Arab socialism and Wahhabi Saudi beliefs are not synonymous. I was aware that Iraq and Saudi Arabia are not the same country. I was aware that Saudi Arabia is not an anti-imperialist country. Thoughts on Taliban? And like many Americans, after 9/11, I went, wait a second. But all kinds of people in the United States were told, basically, Saddam Hussein, Arab, Osama bin Laden, Arab, Saddam Hussein, Muslim, Osama bin Laden, Muslim. So basically, they're exactly the same. And it's like, no, it does not work that way. No, it does not work that way. These are two completely different countries. These are two completely different strands of the Islamic faith. These are two completely different political movements. One guy is a very secular Sunni who does not believe in a religious government. The other guy is a fanatic who believes you should have an absolute monarchy. They're not the same. Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden were not in any way the same, and they did not collaborate in any conceivable way. But the Americans were basically told, oh, they're all in it together. Don't you know that? They're all in it together. They're all in it. It was deeply infuriating to me to see people's ignorance played on like that. Right? Most people that I went to school with, most people I was around at that time had never heard of Islam until 9/11 happened. They didn't know what a Muslim was. And they were told that, quote, they are all in it together. Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein are the same. And many people didn't quite understand that Saudi Arabia and the US government are like this. And it shocked me. People thought that, that Saudi Arabia, I remember people saying, well, we're probably going to invade Saudi Arabia next. No, we're not. It was unbelievable how people's ignorance was played off. And there was this ignorant, racist campaign that, Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden are somehow the same. 9/11 was conducted by both of them. And somehow invading Iraq makes perfect sense. And we were lied to. We were manipulated. We were duped. We were duped and we were lied to. And the lies have just continued. And the USA, look, show me one place in the world where Al-Qaeda and the US government are not on the same side. Show me one single place, one single war going on right now where Al-Qaeda and the US government are not on the same side. In Yemen, the US government is backing Saudi Arabia as it bombs and destroys and kills the people of Yemen with US-made weapons, etc. The people of Yemen are resisting and fighting for control of their country. It's the Vietnam of our time. It's a battle for national liberation. What side is Al-Qaeda on? Al-Qaeda is supporting the Saudis, just like the United States. Al-Qaeda is attacking the Houthis and the National Liberation Movement of Yemen, just like the United States. Bahrain. Take Bahrain. The people of Bahrain, the majority of whom are Shia, are fighting for democracy. They want the Saudi-imposed monarchy removed. They want the right to elect their leaders. The people of Bahrain are fighting for their freedom. They want control of their own country. And what side is the United States on? Well, the United States is very much on the side of the Saudi-imposed monarchy in Bahrain. In fact, the USA has military bases there. The USA has backed Saudi Arabia as Saudi Arabia invaded Bahrain during the Arab Spring to put down the uprising. The United States very much is on the side of the government. And what side is Al-Qaeda on? Al-Qaeda is on the same side. Al-Qaeda says that the people of Bahrain are Shia apostates. Al-Qaeda says that an absolute monarchy, which is what the United States is backing in Bahrain, is what is needed. So Al-Qaeda and the United States and Saudi Arabia are all on the same side in Bahrain. Let's continue. Syria. What side is the United States on? The United States is trying to overthrow the Syrian government led by Bashar al-Assad. What side is Al-Qaeda on? Al-Qaeda is also trying to overthrow the Syrian government led by Bashar al-Assad. Libya. Remember that? The United States overthrew Muammar Gaddafi, the socialist leader of Libya. What side was Al-Qaeda on in that war? Were they supporting Gaddafi? No, they were trying to overthrow him. And in fact, do you remember that horrendous bombing, the Manchester bombing? Do you remember that? Where there was a bombing in Manchester at the concert and all kinds of people were mangled and killed. Do you remember the terrorist who conducted that bombing? Turns out that terrorist was Libyan. He was from Libya. And he was one of the people the United States had armed and given weapons to. He had been in Libya fighting against Gaddafi with his father, armed by the United States and the United Kingdom. So you saw that horrendous concert bombing. The guy who did that was the guy that the United States was supporting. He was on the side of the United States. The war on terror is a farce. We need a war on terror. I would not be opposed to a war on terror. I would not be opposed to that. For the United States, Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, to have a real war on terror. And you know where the war on terror would begin? It would begin at Langley. There would be mass arrests at the CIA headquarters. Mass arrests. They would drag John Brennan, who ran the CIA operations in Saudi Arabia for many decades before Barack Obama appointed him the head of the American intelligence. They would drag John Brennan out of the CIA headquarters in handcuffs. That would be a real war on terror. I'm talking about a real war on terror. A real war on terror would involve the invasion of Riyadh and the arresting of the Saudi royal family. That would be a real war on terror. A real war on terror would involve the United States teaming up with the Syrian Arab Republic and with Russia and with Iran to defend the Syrian Arab Republic and crush the campaign of terrorism that the CIA has been unleashing in that country with the help of Turkey, with the help of France and Britain, etc. That would be a real war on terror. A real war on terror would not be a particularly bad thing. The USA is not waging a war on terror. The USA is doing the opposite. The USA has been fomenting terrorism around the world, aiding the terrorists and fighting the enemies of the terrorists. The sooner that you recognize that that's what's really been going on, the better off we are, because it bothers me to see the fact that 9/11 was such a horrendous event. Killed Gaddafi. United Africa. 9/11 was a horrendous event, an absolutely horrendous event. And I was far away from here at that time. I was living in a small, tiny town. But I can't imagine what it would have been like to live in Manhattan or New York City during the time of 9/11. Must have been an utter nightmare. I mean, I was living in a little town and we were all terrified. So imagine what it would have been like to live here in New York City and have the streets covered in rubble and all the ash and all the debris. It must have been an utter terrifying experience. My heart goes out to everyone who lived here at that time. But they use events like this to argue that we need more of these wars, not pointing out that these wars are being waged not against the terrorists. In fact, these wars have strengthened these terrorists, the kind of people who do these horrendous attacks, the kind of people who do the horrendous attacks that ISIS carries out, that Al-Qaeda carries out. Their organizations have gotten stronger. They have become a much bigger factor in the world. This war on terror is a fraud. Gulag. It's a fraud. And I want to say also, I'll just say this, that in the aftermath of the war on terror, the U.S. left dropped the ball. The United States left epically dropped the ball. It was one of the biggest public relations errors I have ever seen. After 9/11, the response of Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, Ward Churchill, the various voices purporting to represent leftism in the United States was this. They said 9/11 was awful, a lot of innocent people died, and this is what the United States has done to many countries around the world. Someone did to us what we've done to them for so long. That was the response. Well, that would be the correct response if Saddam Hussein had attacked us on 9/11. That would be the correct response if the Vietnamese had attacked us on 9/11. That would be the correct response if the Iranians had attacked us on 9/11. Except that's not what happened. We were not attacked by Iran. We were not attacked by Iraq. We were not attacked by Vietnam. We were not attacked by Chile. We were not attacked by the people we victimized. 9/11 was not revenge for the crimes of U.S. imperialism. Even according to the official story, and I'm not going to, get into other stuff, right? We know what Fidel Castro has said about 9/11. There's a lot about the official story that we don't know and that doesn't add up. But beyond even taking the official story, the people who attacked us on 9/11 were people well embedded with one of the most U.S.-aligned, U.S.-propped-up governments around the world, and are from a fighting force the United States has been arming and supporting all over the world for decades. 9/11 was not revenge. It was not revenge by the people of the world for the horrendous crimes of U.S. imperialism. That's not what happened. And for the US left to present it as such was a public relations disaster. Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, Ward Churchill, bless her heart, very famous, very important Asian American activist Yuri Kochiyama, was older woman, and she gave an interview where she compared Osama bin Laden to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. No, that was idiotic. It was wrong. She's old. She was, she didn't know what she was saying. But, Ward Churchill, the famous Native American scholar, he wrote this essay that I read when I was in high school, and I felt all pumped up. Some people push back. It was all about all the Iraqi children who were killed by U.S. sanctions. He was arguing that 9/11 made sense as an act of self-defense, except it wasn't. It wasn't. Iraq did not attack us on 9/11. The Vietnamese did not attack us on 9/11. The Koreans did not attack us on 9/11. 9/11 was not revenge. It simply was not revenge. And that narrative, that response to 9/11 from the American organized political left was epic stupidity. In fact, what the American political left should have said after 9/11, what would have been an effective response, would have been to say what Libya said, say what Syria said, say what Russia and China and Cuba and Venezuela, say what they said, which is, great, now we can all agree that Al-Qaeda is bad. Now we can agree that this policy of arming Islamic extremists against socialist and independent governments is bad. Yes, wow, United States, we've been trying to tell you how evil your Saudi friends are, how evil the bin Laden family and the Al-Qaeda death squads are. We've been trying to tell you how evil they are for years. And now you get it. That would have been the correct response. To point out that these folks weren't anti-imperialists. To point out that the anti-imperialists, like Cuba, like Venezuela, like Libya, like Iraq, like Syria, like Iran, have been fighting these people for years. To point out that for one brief moment, the United States was realizing that the people that it had been aligning with are dangerous, bloodthirsty extremists, and that maybe supporting them is not a good thing. The U.S. left, the organized political left shot itself in the foot. To many, and Fox News and the neocons jumped on top of this, Oh, the leftists all like Al-Qaeda. They think Al-Qaeda are freedom fighters. No, that's what the U.S. government thinks. That's what the CIA thinks. That's what Zbigniew Brzezinski thinks. No, we don't think Al-Qaeda are freedom fighters. That's what America and U.S. foreign policy has been saying for decades. Anarchism? No, but that was not the language. That was not the tone American leftists chose to use. The American left doubled down on this narrative. Colin Powell. On this narrative that somehow Osama bin Laden, they're the Vietnamese, they're the National Liberation, and it was idiotic. It was an epic failure. It was an epic failure, but it was very much the curse of synthetic leftism. It was very much the curse of the remnants of the 1960s era. These people were thinking about Vietnam. They were thinking about the Korean War. They were generals fighting the last war. That's why they made this epic blunder. Part of it was probably infiltration as well. All right, let's be real about that. Part of it was probably the fact that the left is very, very well infiltrated and controlled. But part of it was also that these were generals fighting the last war. We're in a new ballpark now. The global situation has changed. This isn't Vietnam. This isn't the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The Cold War is long over. We're in a new ballpark. And the most important thing we need to remember in these new times is that average Americans are not our enemies. Average Americans who just want to feed their kids, just want a decent life, just want a better country are not our enemies. Our enemies are the Wall Street imperialists. Our enemies are the big banks and corporations that dominate the world. Our enemies are the Pentagon and the CIA and the intelligence apparatus. Our real enemies are at home. But average Americans, working Americans, who've seen their living standards go down, who've seen their conditions get worse, who've seen their kids go to prison, in a prison for profit, prison industrial complex, who've seen their kids sent off to die in wars, who've seen their children die from opioid addiction as big pharma overprescribes painkillers. Folks, average Americans are not our enemies. We don't want to destroy America. We want a better life for the working families of the United States. We want a better life for the people of the United States. We want to end the attacks on working families being waged by the big corporations and monopolies. We want a government of action that will fight for working families. That's what we need. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Average Americans are not our enemies. We need to completely change the way we interact with the public. Because the messaging style left over from the 1970s, the Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, Weatherman narrative has got to be scrapped. If we are going to get through this, if we're going to build a genuine anti-imperialist working class movement, we've got to get over the hippie stuff. Got to get over the anti-populism. Got to get over the bohemianism. Out of the movement to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. And if that had been our approach following 9/11, the world would be very different right now. So I just wanted to give you those remarks. And now we'll do our roll call. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Please be sure to tweet this out and share it. What? Malcolm X. MLK. Malcolm X. MLK. Question mark. All right. Names and locations. We got Dylan in California. Dylan Small. We've got Stephen in Riverside, California. We've got Calgary, Canada, Tulare, California, Goran in Sweden, Lucha in Mississippi, right? Joey from Belize, Elias from Wisconsin, Alan in Utah, Ryan out in Oakland, Brad in St. Louis, Oz Whistles in Australia, Nate in Chicago, Michael in Las Vegas, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Max the Sax at Washington, D.C., Occupy Congress. That is so exciting. Austin, Texas, right? Idaho, Gerard McDermott, Clarksville, Tennessee, Carolyn Dario with Tomorrow in His Heart from Brooklyn, Greece, Detroit, Renew, New Zealand, Sweden, Adelaide, Australia, Booyah, JT24, Mississippi, Quinn and Meredith in Eatonville, Washington, Tristan out in Maryland, shout out to you, Tristan, Sunshine Coast of Australia, Old Gringo, Portland, Oregon, Temple City, California, Fred in Alameda, California, John in Houston, Rotterdam, the Netherlands, Sam in Chicago, Antarctica, Neil Fraser out in Hong Kong, Emma in Ontario, William in Gateshead, England, Mo in Toronto, Don DeRing in New York City. I think I'll make you a mod. You're now a mod. All right. Northern Michigan, Kansas City, Old Gringo, Coco and Xavier in Miami, Sam, Wisconsin, PC USA, Washington, Sam from Washington, Pomona, California, Tunisia, right here, Calgary, Denver, Deb in Napa Valley, welcome, St. David's from Bermuda, Old Gringo, Cornwall, UK, Marlon from San Diego, Oxford, Ireland, Rhode Island, Queens, Mosin from Iran, Puebla, Chino, California, Palo Alto, California. I've been out there. That's a very nice area. St. Louis, Allen in Chicago, Seattle, Washington, Lebanon, Texas, Bahrain, Fort Lauderdale. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Northern California, Manhattan. That's where I'm from. I'm right here in Manhattan. Leipzig, East Germany. Welcome, everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to crush that subscribe button. Crush that notifications bell. Make sure you're getting notifications, because that's how you find out that we're going to do this. All right? I'm going to drill 5 for 5. Be sure to post this video wherever videos are posted. Reddit, Twitter, tweet it out, Facebook status it. You know, just let people know about it. Anthony in the Industrial Midwest, Steve out in Michigan. Be sure to share this video, because the rest of this stream will be me answering your super chat questions. That's what the rest of this stream will be. Ash in Chicago. So be sure to hit me with some more super chats. Keep the super chats rolling in. Are these imperialists besides the U.S. allies to oppose? Imperialists besides U.S. to oppose. So keep the super chats rolling in, and now for the rest of the stream, I will answer your super chat questions. First one, BBC admits that its gas reports were false. Well, I don't want to get the details of that wrong, but if you look into what's been going on there, a lot of the allegations against the Syrian government have fallen apart. And it's important to note that this is not the first time that the allegations the United States uses to justify regime change and war have fallen apart. In fact, they often do. Weapons of mass destruction were not there. Right? Saddam Hussein was not actually ripping babies from their incubators. Turns out Noriega in Panama was not actually the big drug kingpin that we had to invade Panama to get rid of him over. Turns out the Gulf of Tonkin incident was lied about in order to justify U.S. intervention in Vietnam. There are many, many, many lies that are told by the U.S. government in the lead up to war. And you would think that would be front page news, but it's not. When they're trying to convince us to support another war, they pump out these very emotional stories. However, when these highly emotional hot-button stories are debunked, at that point, the dumbest thing I've ever heard. At that point, it becomes old news. Turns out the UN admits that Slobodan Milosevic was not committing genocide. There was a civil war going on in Yugoslavia. Atrocities were committed on both sides. But, you know, there was not a big genocide going on. Well, too late. USA bombed Yugoslavia. Kosovo has basically become a UN colony. Lie after lie after lie is told in order to justify these wars. And the correction, thank you, Theodore, the correction is never given the attention that it deserves. The correction always comes a couple years later. We find out that it's not the case. And then the very same people who believed it believe the very next one. I mean, they fall for this over and over and over again. And it's very disturbing. And now the latest allegation, the latest addition to this is the bread tube milieu goes as far as saying that if you don't believe these lies, the second that they are told, if you don't believe them, you are the equivalent of a Nazi, of a white supremacist Holocaust denier. That is the new narrative they've got. Anyone who doesn't believe the lies spread to justify war, to justify hostility to China, to justify hostility to Syria or Venezuela, anyone who doesn't believe them is the same as a Nazi. That's the new talking point. That is the new talking point that BreadTube, is pushing out there. And it's got to be pushed back against. It sets a dangerous precedent. It says you are not allowed, that if you question the lies the U.S. government is promoting in order to spread wars, you deserve to be beaten up and killed by Antifa. That we should treat Jimmy Dore the same way we should treat David Duke. That is their message. right? That all who question U.S. media claims are the same as those who deny the Holocaust and advocate racial supremacy. And if that is not disturbing to you, and if you are not disturbed by that logic, smartest thing I've ever heard. I don't know what to tell you, because it's a deeply, deeply disturbing message. It's a deeply disturbing message. And that shows that BreadTube serves imperialism. And that shows that we have a responsibility to counter these narratives. So I think I've spoken my piece on that. Jackson Hinkle arrest. Well, he was arrested yesterday in the demonstrations as part of the Occupy Congress. And Occupy Congress continues, right? There are people once again demonstrating on Capitol Hill. And I am so excited about it. You know what would put a big smile on my face? As much as I love them, and I do, and if you're watching, guys, shout out to you. I love you, John Brown volunteers. But you know what would put a big, big grin on my face? It would be the best thing possible. Is if Occupy Congress became the new Occupy Wall Street. And I could give a big hug to my friends in the John Brown volunteers and dispatch them to Washington, D.C. to be part of a new uprising demanding economic justice. If Occupy D.C. could really get going, that would be utterly amazing. And if the John Brown volunteers could go and be part of a real awakening of the American people fighting for economic justice, and we could have the city building tendency, right? The Center for Political Innovation, a government of action, if we could become a current within a widespread uprising demanding economic justice, if Occupy Congress turned into Occupy Wall Street 2.0, if thousands of people started convening in Washington, D.C., demanding their rights, and this kind of politics, suit socialism, optimistic, constructive socialism, became a guiding message, that would be amazing. And we've got the people to do it. We've got John Brown volunteers. We've got people who, look, you know, it brings tears to my eyes sometimes to think about how much our message has hit home with people in just a short amount of time. You know, think about some of these John Brown volunteers. You know, young man from Illinois, graduated high school, quit his job, got in his pickup truck, came to New York to help build this organization. Young man from Pennsylvania, sold his Pokemon cards, sold his PlayStation, got on a bus, came to New York to be part of this organization. People are ready for this. The country's coming apart. There's millions of young people that don't have a place in this system. And they don't want to just be edgy on the internet. They don't want to, you know, just show everyone how epically revolutionary they are by tweeting, you know, about how much they want to destroy and burn things down. No. They want to take history into their own hands. They want to fight for a government of action that fights for working families. Understanding monetary system. They want to, you know, all over the country, people have formed reading groups. They've gotten the educational manual of the Center for Political Innovation, We Are City Builders. In Chicago, they're having a reading group. In Texas, they're having a reading group. In California, they're having a reading group. Here in New York, we have reading groups every day. We're moving forward. Leading while learning, learning while leading, from the masses to the masses. The revolutionaries are the fish and the masses are the water. We're doing it. Out of the movement to the masses. Or as Vladimir Lenin said, lower and deeper to the real masses. We're done playing hippie. We're done competing with all the little sects. Out of the movement to the masses. People are hungry. People are starving. People are ready to fight. Hard times are fighting times. Left, right. Hard times are fighting times. Don't starve, fight. That is what people need to hear. And people are doing it. And Jackson Hinkle's doing it. And don't think that this community hasn't been a big influence on Jackson Hinkle. I've never met Jackson Hinkle in person. The way he's talking is definitely a result of this community. Back in 2016, when I was talking about patriotic socialism, we had the Students and Youth for a New America clubs. We stood alone. Nobody talked that way. But now that kind of thinking is very widespread. We make a difference. People are ready for city building socialism. People are ready for constructive socialism. We're doing this, folks. We're doing this. We are doing this. People are watching us and people are liking us. People are waking up. People are ordering copies of the manual. We're doing this. We've just had amazing conferences in California, amazing conferences in Pennsylvania. We're doing this. People are on the street. John Brown volunteers are on the street every day. Reading groups are being, this is happening, folks. This is happening. I want you to go back, if you have the time, go back and read the essay that Mao Zedong wrote, the report on an investigation into the peasant uprising in Hunan. One of the most important essays that Mao Zedong ever wrote. And that essay that Mao wrote, he writes, "The peasants of China will soon rise like a mighty storm, like a whirlwind, a force so great that nothing will be able to hold them back." He says, we now have three choices: to stand in their way and oppose them, to follow behind them, gesticulating and criticizing, or march at their head and lead them. He says, every Chinese is free to choose, but they must choose quickly. That essay could be written about now. The American people will soon rise like a mighty storm, like a hurricane, like a whirlwind. Every American now has three choices: to stand in their way and oppose them, which is what most of the synthetic left is doing; to tail behind them, gesticulating and criticizing, which is what all the ML parties are doing. That's what the Workers' World Party and the ISO and the RCP, that's what they're doing. Or march at their head and lead them, i.e., give them ideology. Teach them what it's all about. Offer them a purpose and a trajectory. Right? Yes, people do come a long way. People change. Yeah, thank you for that information. Offer them a purpose. Offer them a trajectory. And that's what we're doing. We're offering them a purpose. We're offering them a trajectory. Jackson Hinkle is an amazing person. I'm an admirer of Jackson Hinkle. I'm an admirer of Jimmy Dore. I'm an admirer of the folks at the Convo Couch. I'm an admirer of folks that are blazing trail. It's happening, folks. There are forces involved in this that are well beyond all of our control. But to think that we don't have an impact is to severely underestimate what's going on right now. We are doing some amazing things, but we need your support. We need your support. We need your support. Look, I'll just be real with you, right? It's very difficult to keep this stuff going. It is very, very difficult to keep this stuff going. This community has been so generous and so supportive. And without the contributions that you all have sent, without the support that you all have offered, without the endless, relentless promotional work online, promoting the videos, promoting the books, promoting Without that, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now. All of that is happening right now, the convergence of forces right now, is all very much the result of our combined efforts. And we should be very proud of ourselves. We should be very proud of ourselves. But we could use your support. Look, I didn't think I was going to go here, but if you would like to give a special one-time contribution to help the Center for Political Innovation, now would be a great time to do it. You know, my PayPal is the same as my email, calebmaupin@gmail.com, no spaces, periods, or anything, just first name, last name all together at gmail.com. If you want to send some support on PayPal, that would be great. Right? You can support the John Brown Volunteers on Cash App, just $ John Brown Volunteers. Right? They have a Venmo also, at the John Brown Volunteers, John Brown Volunteers. We could use your support. It's difficult to keep this going, but we're doing it. We are going to keep this going. We're relentless. I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. I wouldn't let myself stop. I've been doing this for years. I've had every opportunity in the world to stop, but I just can't do it. Right? Sometimes you've got the revolution in your blood and it just doesn't go away. We've got a lot to do. We've got miles to go before we sleep, as they say. And that is my reaction to the arrest of Jackson Hinkle. Next question. Yeah, wow, that got interesting. That's one of the things about September, right? It brings out this kind of sentimental side in you. All right, thoughts on Singapore. Well, Singapore is a country that is led by a Bonapartist regime. It is very much an example of state capitalism. I do not think that Singapore is a socialist country. I would consider Singapore to be a great example of heavily state-managed capitalism. There are 4 families that basically dominate the economy of Singapore, but out of the desire to have a stable society. The government started by Lee Kuan Yew basically oversaw heavy government involvement in the economy to create a very stable society and rapidly increase living standards. And they have been very successful at doing that. And it's worth noting that even though they're not a socialist country, that the government of Singapore has been an inspiration for some of the policies of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has studied some of their style of economic management. But Singapore is an example of state capitalism, of Bonapartism, where one section of the ruling class, namely 4 families, asserts its will over all of society using the state. And it's interesting because, you know, the Asian tigers, these are countries that were largely feudal. And then as a result of China's rapid industrialization with socialism, as a result of the United States and its geopolitical interests, they were able, with heavy state involvement, to rapidly raise living standards and to have a level of Bonapartism that has never been possible in a Western country, right? You know, I mean, the way the particular faction of the Singapore ruling class has been able to hold its grip on power, that wouldn't be possible in other places. That's largely due to the cultural heritage of Singapore and the fact that feudalism was there, the fact that there's Confucian traditions and such. Singapore is the result of unique historical circumstances, like any other country. It's not a socialist society, but it is very much a Bonapartist regime. It's one of the Asian tiger countries, and it very much, it very much is a result of unique historical circumstances. There's some of the influence of the British colonial legacy in Singapore, for example. Singapore, it's very much a military government. The military is a big part of the government, and they use caning, right? The caning of criminals, right, is kind of what they're famous for around the world. In the 1990s, when I was a kid, they had the famous Michael Fay case, where there was this young American who was in Singapore, the child of American diplomats, and he broke the law of Singapore. I think he engaged in vandalism and graffiti, and so he was sentenced to 6 strokes of the cane on his bare buttocks. And there was this huge outcry in American media about the fact that this young man had been sentenced to receive 6 strokes of the cane on his bare buttocks. And the Clinton administration tried to intervene, and at the end of the day, I think they ended up caning this young man, this young guy. They ended up caning him, and that's a very British colonial tradition. Right? It was the Michael Fay drama. And that the other thing that's interesting is that, Singapore, everything you think Singapore, it doesn't quite fit a political category. There are some people that will tell you Singapore is fascist. And there's a strong case that could be made, but then at the same time, there's a strong argument that it's not. For example, one of the things that fascists tend to promote is racial supremacy. And one thing they've done in Singapore is they've done the opposite. They've done a lot to try and break down the stratification of ethnic groups there, and integrate neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are required to have a certain percentage of every ethnic group, so there's not segregated neighborhoods, and they've tried to basically break down and that doesn't fit fascists. Fascists tend to emphasize the idea that some ethnic groups are better than others, racial pseudoscience, etc. But fascism is definitely an influence on Singapore, no doubt about it. Definitely an influence on Singapore's politics, no question. Many people have pointed out that the symbol of Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists, the Buff, and the symbol of the political party of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore are very similar. So there is an influence of fascism, but there are a lot of things. It's definitely state capitalism. It's definitely a Bonapartist regime, but it doesn't quite fit the category of fascism either. It's a product of British colonialism. It's a product of the feudal heritage of the region. It's a product of Confucianism. It is, the Singapore government and political setup is unique. And it's a product of unique historical circumstances, and it doesn't fit any categories. And look, folks, we need to get out of the misconception that we can put everything in 20th century categories. History was around for a long time before the 20th century, and history was going to be around a lot longer. EU is so disappointed with U.S. withdrawal. They're thinking of giving up on NATO. Any thoughts, right? EU giving up on NATO. Wrote it down. But we need to remember that the 20th century is not the end-all and be-all. Everything is not going to fit in the perfect categories of the 20th century, of fascism, communism, socialism, as we understand in the 20th century, right? And not everything is going to fit perfectly. Not everything is going to fit. Not everything is going to fit, right? We have to remember that, right? That, there will be various forms of Bonapartism. There will be various forms of non-capitalism and socialism in the world. There will be various forms of capitalist societies in decay, and that things are always changing. As I emphasize often, A does not equal A, right? And so to think that we can just relive the 20th century over and over and over again is not accurate. Things will come in new forms. There will be new nuances and new incarnations of various things. We can learn from the past, but we should not consider that we have to fit everything into a cookie cutter or a category from the 20th century. All right. Bolsonaro fears a coup. That doesn't surprise me at all. Bolsonaro's leadership of Brazil has been horrific. He has, supposedly in Peru, or I'm sorry, did I say Peru? That's embarrassing. Bolsonaro's leadership of Brazil has been horrific, right? He was supposed to get in there because we were told, the socialists have done such a bad job. Dilma Rousseff did such a bad job. Well, now he's in there, and he was supposed to, with a free market, with privatizations, make things better, and Brazil has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And the only reason he was elected was because they imprisoned Lula da Silva. The social democrat imprisoned him to prevent him from being able to run. He would have won the election according to every poll. Bolsonaro is atrocious. He's a horrendous leader. He's a neocon. He's a Zionist. He is a free marketeer. He's not a populist. He's a foul-mouthed demagogue, but he's not a populist. He's not a socialist. He's not an anti-imperialist. He's a piece of garbage. Bolsonaro is a piece of garbage. And, you know, if any leader who did as horrendous as a job as he has done, and done so badly for his country, on the one hand, on the other hand, took power as a result of all kinds of interventions in the elections, and I would fear a coup if I was Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, big F, horrendous president, horrendous, not a populist, definitely not a socialist, definitely not an anti-imperialist, garbage. And I would fear a coup if I was Bolsonaro. Next question. The Israel book. I wrote a book about, I mean, I've said this in interviews before, I'll just say it again. Back in 2015, I wrote a book about Israel. The book, you know, it made the case that neoliberalism and Zionism, the political movement to create Israel and the economic school of thought promoting neoliberalism, that they walk hand in hand. And I used Milton Friedman, I used Ayn Rand, I used the fall of the Roosevelt administration to make that case. After I wrote that book, a number of my Jewish friends who are anti-Israel and anti-Zionist approached me and said, you know, there were some parts of this book that weren't cool. And they were right. There were parts of the book that were deeply insensitive. And for that, I apologize to the Jewish American community. I do apologize for the lack of sensitivity and such. And because of that, I did the right thing and I removed it from the market. And so that book is no longer available. At some point, I may republish it under a different name. I may, you know, publish a new edition of it, you know, with the information, you know, I might call it like Zionism and neoliberalism, the history of a relationship, something like that. But at this time, I have removed it from the market. There's like a used copy on Amazon that's very expensive. But I'll just be honest, there are parts of that book that are deeply insensitive. However, people run a mile with it. You know, that book denounces anti-Semitism. That book spends pages and pages opposing police brutality, talking about the Ferguson uprising, talking about the prison industrial complex. And so, you know, yeah, I made some mistakes with that book, and it was the best thing to take it off the market, and I do apologize for the parts of that book that were deeply insensitive. Absolutely. I made a mistake. That said, to portray that book as if I was advocating white nationalism is absolutely ridiculous. And to claim that paragraphs that in that book that are calling for all of the American people to unite and join with the people of the world against imperialism, to claim that somehow that is the same as advocating white separatism is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And that's the thing. You know, there are times in my life where I've made mistakes, folks. There are times in my life where I've made mistakes. But these liars, they're never content to just go, here's a mistake he made. They always have to take it to such an extreme that they discredit themselves. They just discredit themselves. I will never forget the screenshot where they had my statement calling for working people in the United States, all different races, to join arm in arm with the people of the world against imperialism, right next to the 14 words of George Lincoln Rockwell, the white supremacist. If you can, there are two statements that I could not think of being further apart than those two statements. One is a statement calling for the people of all different nationalities and races to come together against imperialism. One is a statement advocating for the promotion of one particular race. Now, if you cannot think of two more opposite things, I don't know what there are. But that's how these people operate, because they're not honest actors. When it really gets down to it, the people smearing me, they don't have a real ideology. They don't. As far as they understand it, American capitalism is fine. Free marketeering is fine. You know, socialism just means you and your friends start like a worker co-op and you share the profits. But there's this secret, vast Nazi conspiracy that has infiltrated, thank you, David, that has infiltrated the U.S. government. And everyone who disagrees with the liberal order, whether it's about Syria or China or Iran or Venezuela or what is it, ivermectin, is that the big thing people are fighting about? I don't even know what that's about, honestly. You know, and whatever it is that goes against the liberal script, whatever it is, anyone who says anything about the liberal against the liberal script is secretly part of this vast cabal of secret white nationalist crypto neo-Nazis that are inside of the government, maneuvering things. This is how these people think. And it would make a great movie. It sounds like the Da Vinci Code. Have you ever seen the Da Vinci Code? That's what it sounds like. And they're always looking for the secret signs and the codes. These people are really shallow people. And, they're going to keep saying what they're saying, and I'm going to do whatever we do. How do we handle the ever-present infiltration by three-letter agencies? Infiltration. Very good question. Writing it down. Three-letter agencies. So there you go. I mean, that's all you want me to say about it. I've said that before, and I'll keep saying it, and that's that. My views on a lot of things have changed over the years, I will say, and that's all there is to say about it. I oppose all forms of racism, all forms of ethnic bigotry, and that's that. And Zionism and Judaism are two different things. Judaism is a religion and an ethnicity that has been around for a long time, and Zionism is a political movement that supports a state. Those are two different things. One can oppose Zionism and not have bigotry against people who practice the Jewish religion or ethnically of the Jewish ethnicity, right? And it's important, I would argue, to always oppose any form of ethnic or racial bigotry. And that's that. Next question. All right, Outline Political History of the Americas. It's a very important book written by William Z. Foster. William Z. Foster was a leader of the U.S. Communist Party, he was the leader of it, and he wrote 5 history volumes in his old age. He wrote the history of the Communist Party of the United States. He wrote the history of African Americans in the United States. He wrote the history of the World Trade Union movement. He wrote the history of the Three Internationals, which is a very good book. And he also wrote a book called The Outline Political History of the Americas. I recommend all of them. They're all very, very good. My favorite is the history of the Three Internationals. But The Outline Political History of the Americas was, William Z. Foster's history of North and South America. It's a history volume. I have it. It's a pretty good book. And I do believe it was used in Soviet schools as a textbook, obviously in Russian. So there you go. Next question. Working conditions in the United States versus China. Well, it depends who. Depends who. I mean, look, there are a lot of people in the United States who work in horrendous conditions, right? They talk about undocumented workers who work in factories across this country where they're using undocumented labor and treating the people horrendously, and the people have injuries and they're not allowed to go to the hospital. And, you can talk about that. You can talk about, human trafficking in the United States and how people are, treated horrendously. But there's also people in the United States who have very good working conditions. I'm here in Manhattan. There's CEOs in offices near here who have very, very comfortable lives. And the same is true in China. I think there are parts of China where the working conditions are very bad. And I know the Chinese government often will support, almost always supports workers when they go on strike. I know that there's been big efforts to clamp down on things like what happened at Foxconn or at the Honda factories that were very bad. But there's also people in China, there's a lot of millionaires and billionaires in China. There's a lot of, tech companies that, that again, where? Right? China is a big country, almost 1 billion people. The United States is a big country, 300 million people. So there are people in the United States who work in very bad conditions. There are people in the United States who work in very good conditions. There are people in China who work in very bad conditions. There are people in China who work in very good conditions, right? I want the conditions of all working people to improve. That is my position. Thoughts on the Taliban? Well, we'll see, right? If the Taliban is willing to join the Belt and Road Initiative, as they indicate, they're talking about economic development, that's a good thing. But we'll see. We really don't know how the Taliban is going to rule. I'm not convinced they are genuine anti-imperialists at this time. I think the United States handed them the country after a long period of negotiations, and we will see what happens. We really don't know. The Taliban could potentially move toward being a genuine anti-imperialist force, but I don't see them as that at this time. I'm not ready to call the game yet. Once the dust clears, once we're done hearing about the USA pulled out and there's chaos, once the Taliban is actually governing Afghanistan, then we will more likely know what kind of role they're going to play. All right. Gaddafi wanted a united Africa. Yes, Gaddafi was the leader of the African Union. He wanted to create an independent African currency as well, and he engaged in economic development in Africa. Built the great man-made river, the world's biggest irrigation system. So yes, Gaddafi is, that's part of why he was targeted. He was an anti-imperialist. But it's important to note that Gaddafi was weak because he was isolated. He had very much offended both Russia and China and Iran, and he didn't have very many allies. And at the time that he was overthrown, in the lead up to his overthrow, he was sucking up to the United States. And he was getting along with BP, and in the lead up to his overthrow, he had isolated himself from the rest of the anti-imperialist camp, and that's an important thing to note. I think Gaddafi did many great things for Libya, raising the life expectancy, etc. Great African leader, but at the same time, he had weakened himself, and that made him more vulnerable. And I hope that other anti-imperialists will recognize how important alliances are. Carlson praising China. All righty. All righty. Okay, ML's on the Gulag Archipelago. I mean, look, there's a lot of critiques of Solzhenitsyn that have been written over the years. Gus Hall, the leader of the Communist Party, he wrote a very good critique of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And a lot of Solzhenitsyn's writings are coming from a place that is explicitly ideologically reactionary. A lot of what he wrote is very explicitly, explicitly in favor of Tsarism and explicitly in favor of like a religious government, etc. And it's more like, they have Orwell for the liberals. George Orwell is for the liberals. Gulag Archipelago, that stuff is much more doctrinaire right wing. And you have to kind of already accept, it's horror stories that are written for a more right-wing anti-communist audience. It's more neocon, conservative, it's not the kind of thing you really want to argue with. It's more just, it's for people that are already on board with anti-communism, to get them psyched up and to get them to be religious and traditional. So there you go. Anarchism. All right, well, I'll explain, as I've always explained, there are generally three schools of anti-capitalism. The first school of anti-capitalism is called social democracy, and social democracy believes that Western capitalism just kind of naturally, gradually turns into socialism one step at a time. Socialism is just the sum of reforms, and that the imperialists are more advanced because they're closer along to socialism, because they have more democracy and human rights than the developing countries. Then you have Marxism, or Marxism-Leninism, 21st century socialism. It says, no, it's not just the sum of reforms. There's an actual seizure of political power that goes on. It's anti-imperialist. It sees imperialism as holding back economic development. And then you have anarchism, which argues that socialism will be created on a voluntary basis, and that you should reject state action. Anarchists don't want to change laws. They don't want to vote. They simply advocate that the creation of kind of voluntary communities, and in some cases, ultra-left adventurism or direct action on the job. It is the ultra-left school of anti-capitalist thought. And those are generally, among anti-capitalists and leftists and revolutionaries, you get those three schools. Social democracy is the right-wing deviation. Anarchism is the ultra-leftist deviation. Marxism-Leninism, and 21st century socialism focus on the seizure of political power and the dismantling of imperialism. Social democracy focuses on gradual reforms and views imperialism in a positive light. And anarchism generally opposes any political action, rejects the need for state power, and wants to create a socialist society on a voluntary basis. So there you go. Colin Powell, all right, Trotskyism, we'll talk about that. All right. Colin Powell, he got up and he made the case about weapons of mass destruction at the UN, etc. That's Colin Powell. And he was part of that. And people often make it sound like he was better somehow, or no, Colin Powell, he was just as much a part of that warmonger. I mean, his whole career started covering up the My Lai massacre. Colin Powell was not a good guy by any means, Would I be closer to Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr.? I don't know. I mean, again, they were moving almost closer to each other at the time that Malcolm X was killed, and by the time Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, they were both coming to more or less anti-capitalist conclusions. They were both, Malcolm X was moving out of black nationalism into more of an anti-imperialist direction. He was much more critical of capitalism, speaking at militant labor forums, etc. Martin Luther King Jr. was, moving away from simply organizing around against legal segregation. He began an anti-poverty campaign, and he was opposing the Vietnam War and opposing militarism. And they were both moving closer to a Marxist direction at the time they were killed. So if they had lived, who knows where they would have ended up, right? Especially with the trajectory of events and how things unfolded during the 1970s. Who knows? Who knows where they would have ended up? So, both of them were moving in a very good direction. They came from different places. Martin Luther King Jr. came from the liberal place of opposing Jim Crow segregation. Malcolm X came from the black nationalist and black separatist place of wanting to just completely cut all ties with black society, with white society, etc., and the Nation of Islam and their religious viewpoint. And at the time of their deaths, they were both moving closer to where I'm at. I mean, I'm a white guy, so not exactly where I'm at, but closer to a worldview that is similar to mine, which is an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist worldview. And they were both moving closer to such a worldview at the time of their deaths. But then they were both killed. And I think that in both cases, those who killed them were probably motivated by the direction they were moving in. They saw that they were moving in this direction, and that this direction would put them in line, with the global anti-imperialist movement of the time, and that made them far more dangerous. So there you go. And the Black Panther Party, which emerged after, strongest after both of their deaths, was very much an expression of the Black liberation movement moving in that direction. The Black Panther Party that emerged, 1966 is when it started, but 69, 70 was the height of its power, was very much, though Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had both been killed, it was very much, the Black revolutionary movement moving in the direction that they were moving. It was a revolutionary Marxist-Leninist Black nationalist organization that studied the Red Book and had relations with existing socialism. So there you go. The Black Panther Party was very much an expression of what the direction that both of them were moving. And they were kind of on a convergence course from separate places. Very interesting. Are other imperialists to oppose beside the U.S.? Sure, French imperialism has committed various horrendous atrocities. German imperialism, British imperialism, they were the original imperialists. They got in and on the game before anybody else did. Italian imperialism. I mean, there are many imperialist countries, and yes, they're worth opposing, and the rivalries between them are worth paying attention to. All right, Ron Paul, Dems, Marxists. And the rivalries between the imperialists are worth paying attention to. And there are divisions among the imperialists. I think the divisions are not necessarily on a state-by-state basis as they once were. There are different factions that are aligned with each other among the various ruling classes of different Western capitalist countries. So there you go. What is the dumbest thing I've ever heard? I mean, I'm sure that's a hyperbolic question because I've heard many dumb things over the years. Many, many dumb things over the years. So, I can't tell you verbatim the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but I've heard many, many dumb things over the years. I've heard that America is the greatest country in the world, and if you don't believe that, you must be brainwashed. I've heard that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. I've heard that you must believe everything that we are told about Syria or Libya or China or Iran, and if you don't, you're a Nazi. These are all very dumb things that we're hearing. I've heard many dumb things over the years. So there you go. I've heard many, many dumb things. What's the smartest thing I've overheard over the years? I've heard many, many smart things over the years. One of the most important things that I've heard over the years is that, and it was made clear, and it became clear to me,